Hi everybody, and thank you for coming. This is our second meeting of this council. So to start off with, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yeah, I've received one apology from Councillor Ian Hunt from Much Haddon Parish Council.
Thank you, Katie. And just to say welcome to everybody, and just to remind you that we are being webcast. So please make sure you use your microphones if you do wish to speak, just so that anyone watching online is able to hear. So thank you very much. So item 3 is any declarations of interest. So are there any declarations? Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 4, and that's the minutes of the meeting from the 5th of July 2023. So we have before us the minutes from the committee meeting that was held then. And are there any amendments to the minutes, or are you content for it to be signed off? Okay.
Thank you. Page 7, where it talks about, I think you proposed, I seconded the motion for that in the minutes. My name is Mr. Elps. Could that be corrected, please? Thank you.
That could be corrected. Thank you. Anything else? Does anybody have any other comments? Okay, thank you. So I will sign those minutes off. So, yeah, so if we can have a proposer to say that they are, thank you, true, and it's so proposer, Councillor Townsend, and the seconder, please. Councillor Smith, thank you. And then can we vote, please, that so 4 to say that we can pass these minutes, and anyone against, and anyone abstaining? Oh,
I was absent.
okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So moving on to item number 5, and that's the standards update from James Ellis, Head of Legal and Democratic. So over to James, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the update on standards matters which have taken place over the last 6 months. This is a standard report that comes to every meeting of the Standards Committee. As it sets out in paragraph 2.2, it is in the Constitution that the monitoring officer will present a general report on standard matters at each committee meeting, updating the committee on the work under the monitoring officer. So I do apologise for dragging you all to Hertford for this one item, but you know I'm required to do it by the Constitution. You will see at paragraph 2.4, I have set out the latest lot of complaints that I have received as monitoring officer since this committee last met. As I say, at this stage of almost every time I bring this report, it is anonymised, so that there are you're able to tell whether they are parish councillors or district councillors or town councillors, but that is about it when it comes to where the complaints are from. They're designed to give you a bit of a flavour of the kind of complaints that I receive and how they're resolved. The thinking behind this is when if this report isn't brought to this committee, then members may kind of be assuming that there have been no complaints and everything is sort of, you know, everything's quiet on the Western Front, whereas as you can see there are a few complaints that do come in, and again the column on the right hand side tells you how they've been resolved. That's pretty much it, really. I'm happy to take any questions members might have around the state of play with complaints that have been received. I will just remind members that I'm not able to go into any details that would reveal who those members are, primarily because the ones that have been resolved have been through the system and have been resolved in the proper way, and clearly those members who are the focus of those complaints aren't here to respond to anything that was brought forward. So I'm happy to hand over to members for any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I just wondered, just for clarification, what does it mean, member not in capacity under section 27 of the Localism Act? First one.
So I'll hand over to the independent person in a moment as well, because he has experience of this. But generally, under the Localism Act, it does set out that whilst councillors are councillors, you are not councillors 24 hours a day. You are councillors when you are undertaking council business and when you are partaking in stuff that is relevant to the council. So, for example, when you're doing your weekly shop down Morrison's, you are not a councillor. So if someone is complaining that they saw Councillor Carter in the fruit and veg aisle of Morrison's and was saying something unsavoury, you are not in capacity because you at that point are an individual and you are not a councillor. So such a complaint would come in, and there are tests that are applied to determine whether or not you are acting in your capacity at that point. A key sort of indicator that you are acting in your capacity, that you are engaged in council business, that you are dealing with issues that are affecting the council. But clearly, if you're at a friend's party and you're talking about something that's nothing to do with the council, then you would not be in capacity in that situation. I'll hand over to the independent person if he would like to add anything on that.
Yeah, no, nothing really other than to say that the legislation does provide for this very specific test. As whenever complaints come in, it's always the first test to be applied. Is the person in capacity? And this instances arise, as James has suggested, in Morrison's or other shops are available where people make undesirable remarks or things happen. If they aren't in capacity, then that's the end of the matter, basically. And that's Parliament's decision. Unlike members of Parliament, of course, who do tend to be in capacity, all as we know from instances that have arisen, are in capacity, I think, all the time. Councillors are not.
Just to add to that as well, that there have been kind of cases that have happened across the country. I think we rely quite a lot on Welsh cases, don't we, because of certain reasons, but there are cases that we can point to where members have behaved in a certain way in a certain setting that we can then apply to situations that we come across here to determine whether someone was in capacity or not. But as Nicholas says, we if it doesn't clear that first hurdle, it goes no further, basically.
I mean, because the expectation is that elected representatives will conduct themselves in an appropriate way all the time. I mean, because you've been entrusted by the electorate to do that. But in terms of the code of conduct, that's always the first test to be applied, because legislation requires that test to be applied. So that's how it works.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Councillor Stowe.
On the other one, there's two things. One is the fact when a complaint goes out, say, about a parish councillor or a town councillor or a district councillor, and then they resign their position, I understand the complaint then falls, doesn't it? Because they're no longer in that position. That was one point. And the other thing was that I was asked this question by somebody a little while ago. How much information, redacted information, would be available under FOI?
So on the first point, you're correct. If a member were to be subject of a complaint and would then resign, the matter falls away. However, if the member was to then come back into a position as a councillor within, I think it's 6 months, is it?
It's certainly there is a I think is it. I had him in mind 14 months, but perhaps I'm mistaken.
Yeah, there is a period.
Yes, but if you come back,
that if a councillor leaves, then we would sort of set the clock running at that point, basically. So that's there to stop members from resigning. The complaint runs, falls away, and then getting co-opted straight back onto the council and sort of carrying on without having to answer it. So that is the first point. On FOI, so I think it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. So it depends what the complaint is about. Clearly, there will be some complaints, as you will see from the list here, which are considered very trivial. So, for example, you've got one where the complaint was that the person making the complaint felt that the councillor they were complaining against had a lack of understanding around the topic they were talking about. That's their opinion. It's very minor. It's very trivial. Now, that's a very different set of circumstances to something that might be a little bit more serious. So I think the answer has to be that you would look at each case on a case-by-case basis. It's not the case that they are completely, that they're completely ruled out from the off, but I think, you need to sort of take a a reasoned approach to what the complaint was about, who is named in those complaints, and the nature of them. So it's not a kind of a one size fits all, really.
Thank you, James. Councillor Furness. I noticed that these are consecutive records, but there seems to be number 11 missing. Where we've got complaint number 10, complaint 12, 13.
Yeah, of course. If you just look at paragraph 2.5 of the report, which is just below where the table finishes, I'll just say that where complaints are withdrawn by the complainant, I don't include them in the list, basically. So what would have happened to what would have been complaint 11 is that it would have been withdrawn by the complainant, so it kind of falls away from that perspective. So the ones that are included here are ones that have been submitted by the complainant, and I've had to take them through the whole process to determine whether they're in capacity, whether they've breached the code of conduct for whatever reason. Complaint 11 would have started off as a complaint, and then the complainant, for whatever reason, would have said, "Do you know what, I've changed my mind, I want to withdraw it, can you please not look at it any further," and it drops away. So I don't include that in there. I mean, going forward, you can tell me if you would rather, as a committee, I can include complaint 11 and simply say in the last column, withdrawn by the complainant, if that's easier for you. I'm happy to do either, really. So I'll be guided by the committee really on how you want that going forward.
I was just going to say that I think for clarity and to negate the potential of someone saying something's been swept away is to include it numerically and say withdrawn prior to the need for further investigation. I think that would be beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Everybody be happy with that suggestion? Okay. Thank you, James. Oh.
Thank you very much. It was two-part question for me. So on the basis there were 13 complaints across 2023, just to understand if that's sort of in line with kind of usual expectation, whether that's higher or lower than one would expect within a year. And in relation to the ongoing, I appreciate you can't go into details, and we'll be taking them through the process as normal. But whether there's any indication on either those complaints or any others as to what the usual timelines for resolving complaints one way or another tends to be. Thank you.
As it happens, we got an FOI request not long ago asking about the number of complaints we'd had every year. So I'm just trying to find that so I can tell you what we said. I think off the top of my head, I think 2023 was a little down on what we normally have. There was a lovely period at the beginning of 2023 where I thought that the monitoring officer email wasn't working because I wasn't receiving anything. So I checked with IT to make sure it was working, and it was. And then I think I then got my comeuppance because then emails started to come in. So I don't know what was happening in that sort of period, sort of between January and kind of March or whenever it might have been, when it was quite quiet, January and April, but it picked up. I'm not able to find the email I'm looking for. I will continue to look whilst the rest of the committee is happening, see if we can find it. But from memory, I think 2023 was a little bit lower than what would normally be expected. It's a little bit higher than that. The second, how long it takes to yeah. So in our complaints handling procedure, so we've got a separate document which is on the website around how complaints are dealt with. It sets out the process, the steps that each complaint goes through, the steps that I'll take as the monitoring officer, the role of the independent person, and we've put in there that as a ceiling, it's a 3-month period from receiving the complaint. It's very rare that we go to that 3 months. The reason we put 3 months in there is because there are some. Actually, one of the ones that we've got on the list here generated a lot of sort of local interest, and a lot of people locally were emailing in and providing sort of their view on the complaint and what happened. And when that happens, it gets very difficult to because you can set deadlines when you want things to come in, but then, you know, members of the public will continue to send things in, and you don't want to, you know, you don't want to stop them from contributing if they really want to get involved. So we put 3 months on it. It's very rare that they get to that full 3 months. Normally we try and get it done as quickly as possible, but I would say about sort of a month or thereabouts to get it resolved. A lot of them, well, they almost always take a lot of time to delve into. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have investigated, well, not investigated, what's the word?
Well,
It's an initial assessment, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that we've assessed the complaint. An investigation is for the subcommittee to do. So as an initial assessment, that we assess all aspects of the complaint. We talk to all the people who have been identified. We talk to people on the side of the person being complained of, so that everybody gets a fair sort of a fair hearing, if you like. So they are very lengthy exercises, but we do try and get them done as quickly as possible in a month. I don't know if Nicholas wants to add
Yeah,
anything.
just a couple of points in terms of numbers. It's interesting because of all the 10 districts, stroke boroughs in in Hertfordshire, the ones with parishes, and East Herts has got, I think, more parishes than anybody else. We've got about 40 parishes, I think. It's a
I
very
think it
significant
was-
number.
Yeah, 4
North
and
Herts,
6, yeah.
so yeah, North Herts is next, is about high 30s, but many of the districts don't have any parishes, so therefore there are fewer complaints. But where you've got lots of parishes, most complaints, by definition, do come from the parish councils within. So that does knock up the numbers. And the other point also in relation to the James's second point about dealing with them, at the end of it all, the aim of this whole process is fairness. It's fairness to the complainant, but equally fairness to the member complained of. So, for example, instances have arisen elsewhere where a member of the public is entitled to complain, but the complaint might have been prompted not by any genuine misconduct, but because they are disappointed at a lawful decision made by the council. And it isn't unknown for, and they're not doing it in any sort of dishonest way. It's merely because people don't know how the system works. And I think they think sometimes if a decision is taken they don't agree with, well, then there's a mechanism for approaching it, in some people's view, to assert that the member concerned has misconducted herself or himself. So one always has to bear that in mind in reaching a fair conclusion from the assessment process. So all these components they get quite involved because, as James just said, to be certain the thing has been properly considered at the assessment stage, you do have to dig quite a lot just to understand all the ins and outs to reach a proper and reasoned and reasonable and fair determination at that stage before progressing any more, if that's necessary.
James.
Sorry, just to go back to the question around the normal amount of complaints that we get. With 2022, where that really sort of period where everything went quiet was. So there was 2022, we had an unusually low amount of complaints. I think that was around the 6 that we had, whereas 2020, 2021 and 2023, which spans the whole time I've been with the council, have been around the sort of 11 to 14-ish. So that's kind of the ballpark, I think.
Councillor Townsend, oh, sorry, Councillor Clemson.
Hopefully a quick one. I don't know if you'll be able to say this, but the complaints we've had fairly distributed about, you know, it's sort of across 13 people and everyone's getting kind of one complaint against themselves, or do we have sort of, particular?
Certainly,
Some could
certain
do
members get more than.
Yeah, is it?
There are certain individuals and also certain parish councils that appear on my radar more often than others, I would say. So.
Yeah.
Thank you for that democratic response. And Councillor Townsend.
I was just thinking very democratic. Just while I'm being pedantic, another thing that sprang to mind when I first looked at this, and it's quite obvious when you read it properly. However, complaint against a parish councillor, and I scanned across and thought dismissed under it. I thought dismissed. Why? What was the complaint? Well, I wondered whether it might be perhaps complaint or item dismissed might be more suitable.
Yeah, that's fair enough. You know, as it happens, dismissing an elected member is not something that is within my arsenal in any event. But you're right, that could be confusing. So in future, I'll make sure that's complaint dismissed.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I was just wondering about the changes to the complaints handling, which required parish councils to start investigating themselves. Do you get the sense that that is happening and that some parish councils are managing to resolve their own issues more, or are you still having to step in?
It's a difficult one really, because if a complaint is you know, looked at locally first and is resolved, I probably will never hear of it. So the successful ones that are kind of picked up locally and the complainant and the parish or town council talk it over themselves and are able to sort of resolve it amicably between them, then I would imagine I would never hear that. So the percentage of successful ones I won't know about. There have been a one or two, I think, where it's very clear from the complaint itself that it's not going to be capable of local resolution. And I think, as I probably said previously on that new element that we added to the complaint handling procedure, that's just really to encourage as much as possible that people do talk locally. There's nothing really to, you know, it still legally comes to the monitoring officer to be looked at. So it's not as if I can refuse to look at it, if you like. So when they come to myself, if I can see that they're fairly sort of trivial, I will go back and say, you know, have you tried to resolve this between you? But the few that we've had come forward where it's clear to say from the strength of feeling, perhaps from the wording in the complaint, that that's not going to work, then I tend to not push for that, because I just don't think it's worth it really, and I just get involved in it. But as I say, I'm ever the hopeful that there's loads quietly.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Stowe?
I was just going to say that with none of my parish councils, they often mention complaints to me about different members. I always say, if it's between a councillor against another councillor, it might just be robust discussion. But if it's against a member of staff, or the member of staff about a councillor, that might be a true complaint. And I often find that, and I say that to them, and sometimes it sort of goes away. Other times, as you all know, they never go away, do they?
Yeah, I've always taken the view, and I think, you know, I don't think I came up with this myself. It will be contained somewhere, but as elected members, you voluntarily put yourself in the political arena where there is expected to be a rough and tumble of political robust debate. Clearly, members of the public or officers do not put themselves in that same arena. So the discussions between members, there's an expectation that there will be maybe a slightly thicker skin, especially if it's about political matters and criticising each other on opinions, because that's what politics is all about. I think it is a different situation when it's a member of the public that is being treated to the same kind of behaviour, if you like. So that comes into consideration as well. But you know, that's not to say that, you know, a complaint between a member won't have legs, because you know, sometimes they do. So you know, there has to be a line, and I think it's just so that members know where that line is, I suppose.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much, Nicholas and James, for all that clarification. Thank you. There is one recommendation for this item, and that is on page 13 of the agenda pack. So that recommendation is that the committee receives a report and provides any observations to the head of legal and democratic services and monitoring officer. So could I have a proposer for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Stowe, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Townsend. And can we have a show of hands to indicate whether you are in favour or against? So could I have a show of hands for 4? Thank you very much. Doesn't look like there'll be anyone against and abstaining. No. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. So that is carried. Thank you. So lastly, item 8, is there any urgent business No, no urgent business. So there's no urgent business, and that concludes tonight's meeting, and that is at 7:25. Buddy.